Hello and welcome to Long Beach Lens. I'm your host, Derek J. Simpson, Executive Director of the Long Beach Community Action Partnership. Today we have a special 1-hour episode about socioeconomic equity and police relations. Joining in the discussion is Dr. Alex Norman, who is Professor Emeritus of UCLA Luskin School of Public Affairs and co-founder of both Rethinking Greater Long Beach and Advanced Organizing Institute. Also on this show is Mark Coleman, who is a civil rights attorney, and Kelly Calopi from the Long Beach Health Department, who is director of the Long Beach Health Department, or in Health and Human Services. When I talk about this esteemed panel and we talk about the issues of equality and equity, what, first of all, comes to mind when you hear that? Let's start with you, Mark. When you hear that subject, what comes to mind?
Well, in these days, equity is not just making sure that people have access to every service in a sort of equal way, but that any barriers to participation, whether they be language, disability, that those are also taken into account so that people have a meaningful way to enter life in a socioeconomic way. And that's, it's not just about access, it's about entry, making access meaningful for all populations.
Dr. Norman, I know you've been working in this arena for most of your career, if not all of your career. When you hear it and you know from whence you started to where we are now, what thoughts come to your mind?
Well, I think what Mark said is certainly the basis of it. But I think you also have to think of equity in terms of historical terms. And that in order to reach equity, one has to acknowledge, the base from which certain people start. Mm-hmm. And so if they start from a greater distance, then that has to be making up. So social justice is the opposite side of the coin of equity for me. So if it is a just society, then that just society compensates for the mistakes that they have made and for the impact on the people who they have made the mistakes on. So equity carries a much longer term relationship. It's not just providing access, but it's also remedying the situation that caused the inequity in the first place.
Now, Kelly, I left you for last because I had the pleasure of attending a presentation where you actually spoke to the subject of equity from a health and human services perspective, and had a very intriguing PowerPoint that you shared. So I'd like for you to also give your perspective, and then we can go into maybe a few of those slides just that people can see actually what you basically have researched at the health department on this particular subject. And specifically, there's a slide that you had that showed the youth looking over a fence, but then Dr. Norman had an even more intriguing slide that we're going to share as well. So first, your perspective overall.
I think when we think of equity, people talk a lot about equality. And so if we provide equal to everyone, then we're giving everybody the same opportunity. And as we've talked about it in the past, that has not been how it had been for people. So people enter life at different places. Children, they're randomly born into a family, right? So they don't have a choice of where they start. But we have whole communities that may be that have had much more struggle. And so when you have that, if you do equal service or provide equal access, then they still have less access because those communities don't have the access that they haven't had the access that they need. And then that gives you very different outcomes in the service. So when we're looking at equity, it's how do we start to provide a system that allows for the same outcomes or for the possibility of the same outcomes. And in that means that your decisions and how you provide your service is going to look very different.
And you, again, going back to those slides that I mentioned, can we share some of that insight? Because I think the audience will be intrigued. And as they bring the slides up on the screen, can you sort of set the context as to why you created this presentation in the first place?
Yeah, I think, so the vision for our health department is that you have a safe and healthy community for all. And so as we stand in what is for all, it seems sort of like, oh yes, then that means we'll just be equal in what we're doing. But when you think about what health is, a lot of people think of health as health care. But health care really isn't. Being healthy and well is not a healthcare model. And so about a little over 50% of health itself comes from the social context that you live in. And another 30% comes from your behaviors. Only 10% comes from the healthcare system and your access to healthcare, and a little bit from genetics. So when you look at that, social condition and behavior are the primary drivers behind what health looks like, then you have to look at all the rest of the pieces that have created the disparity in health and wellness overall.
And to be clear, a couple of examples of the social conditions that one might think of.
Right, so when we think about that, we think about violence, we think about trauma, poverty, employment, education, and here's the list, is that there are so many, we call them social determinants of health, there are so many pieces that play into people's ability to live a life that is healthy and well, and that we have to pay attention to all of that and not just the fact that you have access to health care.
Wow. And then going forward then in this presentation, you also talked about poverty specifically, and that's important to us as a community. Sure. Because that's what we do as our mission. And walk us through, because this is one of the most interesting slides in the presentation.
Right, and
zip code wise.
So we break our data out by zip code. I know, Dr. Norman breaks them out even in a more granular form in terms of where the poverty exists. But we look at the zip codes, and what we find is approximately half of the city has a much higher rate than the other half in terms of poverty. We can also, if we were showing other slides, we'd do the same thing for education and high school achievement, for employment. And then when we flip to the next slide, we actually look at at what life expectancy looks like. So you see in those areas that have the higher rates of poverty, you see a much lower level of life expectancy, and that the city really has sort of there sort of is a split. And when you look at the map, it's often by the socioeconomic index, and so you can really see that when you look at the map.
And literally, there was a gasp in the room on this particular slide, because it was basically indicating that depending on the zip code that you live in this city, that could determine maybe a 7-year difference in life expectancy.
Right, so there is a 7-year difference, and you can find that, in sort of a 4-mile spread. And so, but it's not, what you hear so much is that your zip code predicts your life expectancy, like how long you will live, it's based on your zip code. Wow. But it's the zip codes and all of the social condition that led to that zip code that is the underlying current for that. And so when we're looking at health now overall, we're talking about what are all the different pieces we have to come together to allow to start to even out what those disparities are. So we've been really taking a strong stand at the national level, as well as in Long Beach, about saying, well, what is health equity? And it's really equitable opportunities to attain your full health potential. And that's not just access. It's, you need to have the access, but it's like our goal is the outcome itself. Right. So what are all the different pieces that need to get you to a space where people, have the opportunities to be healthy across our city? And
then finally, we have on our next slide, the slide that you used here. And when you put this together, the third panel there didn't exist originally, but walk us through the first two. And then Dr. Norman, I'd like you to speak to that third one. So on those first two, Kelly, what were your thoughts when you put this together?
Well, so the first one really shows that if you provide equal service across the city, what you find is that doesn't ensure that you have the same equitable outcome, right? So if you look at the smallest of the children, everybody got the same supports, but he still can't see. And so if you instead start to look at when we're looking at of creating additional opportunity and creating additional access and service, that you understand that you're trying to get everybody to the same outcome, and that is the space of the second slide, and that's it's when you're in a city and you're in a politics and in government and in communities, all communities are a strong stand for themselves, right? When you think of, so all of the communities in Long Beach are taking a strong stand for the fact that they get access to the things that they want and that it fits what they believe is right for their community. And so sometimes it's difficult to make those decisions. To say, okay, we're going to have to really elevate some of our supports of other communities so that you have the same outcome. But in
this kind of goes to what you were saying, Dr. Norman, earlier about the fact that some parts of our society have to come a lot further than others when you talk about getting to the place of equity. And and I hadn't seen the slide, the third panel there. When you presented that to me, I thought, wow, that's pretty different way to look at this. Can you speak to that as well?
Well, if you look at equity and equality, those first two slides, it assumes a standard, and that standard is based on those who have equality and equity now. And so it's a now-based concept. If you look at the third one, it looks at the barriers. And so the boxes are there because they're attempting to overcome a barrier. The third one, which looks at it from a social justice perspective, says we need to remove the barriers. And those barriers aren't always physical. Those barriers are attitudinal. And that means that you might have to delve deeper into the persons who created the barriers so that the attitudes that create the barriers no longer exist. Otherwise, the propensity for creating more barriers exists. So social justice is a theme that third panel looks at.
Now, Kelly, coming back to the set, and I ask you a question because I know that in preparing for this particular show, you mentioned that there are different initiatives going on within the city on this whole subject of equity. And before you have to leave us, can you just sort of go from where we are now to looking forward, what's going on and what can we expect?
Yeah, so there's a team right now that includes members from across the city that are participating in a cohort called Government Alliance for Race and Equity. And it focuses on governments per se, so because when you're looking at policies, when you're looking at how resources are distributed in a city and how decisions are made, those are held often at a city level. And so so the way this looks is that it says, okay, so what are the outcomes we're trying to achieve? It talks a lot about what does an equity lens look like and how do we start to make decisions in this concept of an equity lens. And so you look at what is the outcome that you are trying to achieve. And then through that, you may come up with an initiative or a policy or something along those lines. And instead of moving directly to that, you look at it and say, okay, so who will this fully support? And where might there be issues? And then how do we engage the community to determine what those issues may be? And then how do you mitigate that moving forward so that it's an ongoing process for the decisions that are being made to move government and decision making into a more equitable platform.
Now, will this be something that you and the health department will be driving on behalf of the city? I know that in the meeting with Councilman Richardson, it was talked that certain initiatives would be moved under health. Would this be consistent with that?
Yeah, so right now we're talking about the possibility of the move. So none of those decisions have been made yet, but wherever we align what the equity efforts look like, this will be part of those conversations. We're hiring a health equity coordinator right now to really be looking at the health policies, and then we'll be working with other city departments to really engage with this lens and do some training. Yeah.
Great. So Mark, I want to come back to you. We have about 2 minutes before we go to break. And when you hear this, based on the work that you've been doing in the community, how do you see everything aligning with what you've been working on and what you would like to see going forward?
Well, one thing that I was really interested in was the list of all the indicators. Maybe we go back to that slide that Kelly put up. But what I didn't see in there was what Dr. Norman was talking about, which was really a look through the lens of historical and cultural deprivation of certain groups, or in a new immigrant population, the Cambodian population, Latino population, sort of their historical journey to where they are today. Because those are also very critical if we really want to understand what's keeping people from accessing the community and the resources.
Right.
My other thought was, we're doing a lot of work with the Cambodian community, Alex and I, and the May Center. And what we found is in that community, you're dealing with a culture that really never had an education system. So we have to start back at how do you even learn? Access is fine, but they're going way, way back because that's not part of what they know. We all take that for granted.
Can you hold that thought?
Sure.
Because we're about to go to break, and I want to pick that up when we come back. We're going to take a short break. When we come back, we will be discussing more about the future strategies for equity. Stay tuned for more of Long Beach Lens.
here live in the mix at the Pacific Ballroom here at the Long Beach Arena.
I think it's one of the most spectacular things we've had in Long Beach for years and years and years and years.
This space looks like you could do anything.
I think it's already created a buzz and an action and excitement for the downtown area.
My name is Tari Shakur. I'm youth organizer with Youth Justice Coalition. Our 1% campaign focuses on taking 1% of the budget used for LAPD, LA City Attorneys, Sheriffs, County, and Probation. This equals to $100 million a year. That's enough to fund 25,000 youth jobs, 50 youth centers, and 500 peace builders in schools and on the street, therefore decreasing the school-to-prison pipeline and mass incarceration of people of color in general. Visit youthforjustice.org to learn more about the campaign and get involved.
Hello, I'm Barry Kogert with the Jazz Angels. We've created an environment where seasoned jazz professionals and young students perform side by side. Our students range in age from 10 to 19 and come from a wide variety of backgrounds and schools. The jazz bands are organized by skill level rather than age. If you want to have a positive impact on our youth, get involved with the Jazz Angel team or make a tax-deductible donation. Please visit www.jazzangel.org or call 562-981-8410. Thank you.
Welcome back. I'm Derek J. Simpson. We have Dr. Alex Norman and Mark Coleman and a new guest on the show here with us, and we're discussing equity in our community. Joining us in this segment is also community organizer Dwayne Smith. Welcome. I'm going to speak with you in just a moment, but I want to go to Mark first to finish your thought on equity from the standpoint that people who come here from other countries, there are other issues that oftentimes we don't get to address, such as how do you learn and education, et cetera. And you mentioned May. Share with us what May is all about in your work that you and Dr. Norman are doing there.
Well, May stands for Meditation, Agriculture, Yoga, and Education. Okay. It's all part of the healing for Cambodian immigrants to the United States that were experienced the Khmer Rouge massacre, 1975, 1979, and many of them have settled in Cambodia. In fact, we have the largest Cambodian population this side of Cambodia. So in working with that population, part of their healing is they're becoming integrated into the greater society. So when we talk about access to resources, immigrant integration is a key point. So we went even farther than that. We said, well, how are we going to integrate them into the educational system, which is already somewhat inaccessible for people that don't speak the language? And what we found was that because Cambodia, the country of Cambodia historically has not had a solid education system, many didn't know how to read, how to learn, how to understand information, let alone how do you then manipulate information to gain knowledge. So our work in that community has been to go back, keep rewinding until we get to the place where they are. And that place was, oh, I can learn, I can read, I can understand. That's amazing. I never thought I could. So when we talk about access or equity, we have to really understand where not just the Cambodian population, but the immigrant population from Central America, South America. I mean, there's a shortage of speakers of Guatemalan languages, just talked about in the LA Times. We can't even communicate with people that speak Quechua. Right. So we have to really understand what is meaningful access, not just making opportunities.
And I mean, I'm just amazed in listening to you, because you're talking about a culture that's thousands of years old, and yet education is at the core of issues here in this time. And it makes me think back on one of the teens that was in our program called Men Making a Change, and that was under the LAMP program that you and Dr. Norman especially is aware of. And his name was Barry, who was recently in the news because Barry was killed in an altercation with the police and the dog that was talked about frequently on Credo, I believe was the dog's name. But we have a spoken word piece that I want you to listen to that was done maybe 4 years ago, that Barry told a powerful story about that transition from the killing fields to America, and I'd like to go to that now.
When I was younger, I was never close to my mother. You know, the only thing she ever told me was to be good, do right, but if someone hit you, hit them right back.
I've been at war my whole life for freedom, for the beautiful land of Cambodia. My ancestors overcoming poverty and government corruption, going back thousands of years, still filled with landmines, from wars and parents' abuse, leaving too many scars. My mind been battered, ready to fight with my fists or to dismiss what I was taught. But deep in my heart, all I wanted was love, respect, and honor. For my burden's been heavy. From juvenile halls to county jails, too many violations tipping over scales.
So that was a powerful story. And DeJuan, I know you were a part of Men Making a Change, and you and Barry were friends and colleagues. When you see that, what comes to mind?
First of all, Jadipsu to all my Khmer speaking folks out there. When I see that, you know, I see strength in a youth trying to tell a story. You know, so many times we don't see the history and an individual or, you know, what they go through based off of just like, you know, perception. But to me, it was like a cry out for help and, you know, also just a history lesson to folks who aren't familiar with, you know, the Cambodian community. So,
is that something, Dr. Norman, that you and Mark are finding quite often, that same type of cry out for help in different ways is occurring?
Yes, but you need to go back even further, because the carpet bombing in Cambodia, the war wasn't in Cambodia. The Vietnam War wasn't in Cambodia. Right. Nixon expanded that war into Cambodia through carpet bombing. So it was a USA responsibility, and that's what I mean by you have to go back to the attitudes that caused that. Otherwise, the same perpetuation can take place later. Mm-hmm. And we have to really acknowledge that we really created a disservice to the Cambodian people. And we should be extending reparations beyond access, equity, equality. Because many of them not only came here as immigrants, but they were starved. And starvation stunts your growth. So there's a lot of stunted growth and health problems in that community. And the equity for Cambodians will be quite different from the equity for African Americans. And I was interesting when Kelly Copley was talking about the governmental coordination of services. I would turn that around. I would go to the communities to find out what might constitute equity to Cambodians. You know, what does equity mean to them? One, they're going to have a difficulty in trying to translate that because they've been dominated for thousands of years. So there has to be some translation of that to even get to the point where they can say, okay, equity for us might be either breaking the isolation or showing me respect. And how do you show respect is a cultural thing. So I think that we really have to look at equity and get behind what we perceive equity to be in order to understand what truly equity is with different populations in the city.
Duane, I want to ask you a question because oftentimes when people like Mark or Dr. Norman and I go to meetings and we want to talk about equity from a youth perspective, rarely are there youth at the table. It's older adults talking about those issues, and though you're not a teen anymore, you were when you joined this program. But what does your generation feel when you listen to your friends and your colleagues out on the streets and you hear people like us who are in leadership roles in this community speaking about equity, whether it be from an education perspective or a job perspective or the criminal justice system's perspective? What is your generation feeling, especially as a young man of color?
To speak to that, it's just what I've been hearing from a lot of youth is like, jobs, and youth centers, where they can express themselves and actually have a place to work that's, positive and meaningful, and they can give back to their community. And folks who are from that community work at that community so they can identify with the children and, what they need. From a criminal justice perspective, I think that, it's been a lot of money spent on law enforcement, which is like, to me, it's more like, I call it suppression funds instead of preventional work. So really that preventional work, building up the community, creating jobs, creating a safe place where they can go to like literally save lives from gang violence, police violence, those things.
On that subject, Dr. Norman, I want to read a quote, and you introduced me when we were prepping for this show to the concepts of Robert Peel. And one of his principles were, it says, the police are the public, and the public are the police. The police being only members of the public who are paid to give full-time attention to duties which are incumbent on every citizen in the interest of community welfare and existence. When you hear that as one of his principles, can you first give those who don't know people an understanding of who Robert Peel is and what this particular principle means?
Sure. Robert Peel was an 18th century statesman. And during the European Revolution, Industrial Revolution, people had to stand watch for other people for their goods. And so they attempted to develop a police system. And he was one who thought it would be best to professionalize the police, because in the old watch system, the person you had standing watch might be the same person who ripped you off. So he developed these principles as guiding principles for law enforcement. Now, they'd had 100 years of this, so they had a long time to develop a police system. And what he suggested in that principle is that law enforcement and community welfare is a shared responsibility with the police and the community. That it's not the police's responsibility to provide safety. It's a partnership. And that's what community-oriented policing was supposed to do. It created advisory committees that allowed police and community to get together. It created a PAL, Police Athletic League, that talked to the prevention that Duane mentioned. It saw the police not as a hook and book 'em, but as a person who was interested in the welfare of the community. That's what we don't have now. So we have an us and them perspective. And what we need to do is get to the we-ness of the community's welfare, which is a shared responsibility. And the focus is on prevention rather than on suppression, as he mentioned, or on the statistics of how many people did you catch who were robbers or how many people did you catch who were assaulted. Right. That's not a measure of effectiveness of policing. The measure of effectiveness of policing is prevention of law and disorder.
Mark, how do we get there? How do we get from where we are now to where Dr. Norman is talking about to move forward?
So somewhere along the way, between 18th century England and today, our police have been turned into the guardians of those with property. So if we want to deal with institutionalized issues, which I believe are at the core of police community bad relations, of the lack of equity, equality, integration, we have to get to the institutions. So the police, in my experience, and I just happened to watch Straight Outta Compton the other day, just for the first time, they are the protectors of the ruling class and the wealthy. So we have to talk about that. Because as long as you put them in that position and sort of protecting those interests, they're not going to be. You can make them as community oriented as you want, but when the call comes, you got to lock down this community, that's exactly what they're going to do. And how can you build on that? That's not sincere. That's not going to Robert Peel's principles, where you really felt, those are olden days. We don't have those anymore. We have multinational corporate capitalism and a government that is run by those interests determining how police are used. And that's really, we're going to have to deal with that issue, which permeates the institution. So I think, the police are put in an impossible situation. And so I think their lives matter, the lives of the people that they are dominating in those communities matter, but bettering relations will have to call into question the fundamental economic and social relationships between the powers that move the police.
Mark just said their lives matter, and I know that there's Black Lives Matter, and then there know that those are some that would say all lives matter. DeJuan, I know that you've been active in organizing and in the community. When you hear the term Black Lives Matter or All Lives Matter, what do you feel people should understand about those concepts from your perspective?
Well, first of all, I want to get away from the idea of saying Black Lives Matter is saying all lives doesn't matter. But I want to speak to if the people who are saying all lives matter, I believe that all lives can't matter if Black lives doesn't matter. You get what I'm saying? So if you believe all lives matter, speaking to the stats, right? Blacks are at the forefront of a lot of lockup, mass incarceration, police murders. So to me, I feel like the movement is needed to address those situations, to put that at the forefront, because we're at the forefront whether we want to be or not. So I believe Black Lives Matter, and at the same time, again, all lives can't matter if Black lives doesn't matter. So until that stat changes, then we can say all lives matter.
Dr. Norman, what are your thoughts?
Well, as Mark says, police are in an untenable position. And again, equity is going to mean something different. Law enforcement, public safety equity to African Americans. As the grandson of a slave, I have to really look at the legacy of slavery, that unlike the legacy of the Cambodians, is a recent trauma. You can begin to resolve that. But what about the intergenerational trauma that was never really resolved, that is passed on down from generation to generation? And remember, that was 245 years of slavery. So it meant that the practices of the master to beat people was passed down as a way of creating stability and order. So it's not unusual to find African-American families who discipline their kids a great deal by beating them. So that's a legacy of slavery that we need to understand. Right. And we need to understand that that was perpetuated upon us. Right. And at the same time, we need to understand that the historical relationship between the Black community and the police has been one in which the police were enforcing the Black codes, they were enforcing Jim Crow laws, they were enforcing segregation. So the police were not only there just to protect the property, but it was also to keep the Blacks under control.
And I remember you even saying that there was a time where the police were enforcing laws that were unconstitutional, and that really struck me as, I never thought of it that way, but that's exactly what was happening.
Because the people who were calling the shots told them to enforce the unconstitutional laws. Right. So police don't realize that they are being used also. And that's why blue lives matter. Blue lives matter, Black lives matter, all lives matter. But the matter that we have to get to is who is pulling the strings that places us in this we-they position. Right. And the police tend to look at youth or to look at certain ethnic groups as all criminal suspects. Mm-hmm. Some community groups look at the police as an occupying force. Right. And so we have to get beyond that to who's creating this kind of relationship.
And Mark, again, I'm going to let you take us to break because we only have a short moment here. From a Cambodian community perspective, I would imagine that relationship between law enforcement and that community is even more stressed, would you say?
It's more conflicted.
Yeah.
So, the authorities in Cambodia are run by Hun Sen. It's a brutal dictatorship. You don't go and have free speech movement and have time to speak. Right. But you come here, and the police community relations is very different. But they have to ask the question, how is it different? How am I fitting in? So it's much more complicated for them because they want to integrate and they're here, but they have a legacy of the police equal the dictatorship. I can't do these many things.
Right. We've got a lot of ground to cover and not enough time. So we're going to take another short break. When we come back, we will continue our discussion about equity in our community. Stay tuned for more of Long Beach Lens.
Hi, my name is Ingrid Archie, and thanks to Prop 47, I was given a second chance at life. Prop 47 is a California law passed by an overwhelming majority of voters in 2014. This law allows us to reclaim our lives by changing felony convictions for lower-level nonviolent crimes to misdemeanors. In fact, I am one of over 650,000 people estimated to be eligible for this felony reduction. Prop 47 can help you change your record and remove barriers to employment, housing, and college loans. Look, we all make mistakes, but not every punishment fits the crime. I was given a new opportunity, so now I'm giving back by helping others get a second chance too. But you need to take the initiative because the clock is ticking and the window closes in November 2017. So don't wait. Remove the barriers, change your record now. If you or anyone you know could benefit from Prop 47, share this. Together we can rebuild our communities.
Very pet friendly. Everybody has a dog in Long Beach. It's Dog City.
Well, there's everything to do here. You got the Pike, you got Queen Mary, you got the beaches, you got paddle boarding, surfing. You go half a mile that way, you got surfing, you got downtown.
I just think it's the most incredible, most beautiful, most unique city, which has so much to offer. So I love it here and I'll never leave.
Each year, 7.5 million students nationwide miss nearly a month of school due to excused and unexcused absences. In the Long Beach Unified School District, 10% of students, including almost 11% of kindergartners, are chronically absent. The All-In Attendance Campaign is a long-term, citywide approach to encourage students to attend school every second of every period, every day. With the help of parents, teachers, and the community at large, we can turn attendance around. Are you all in?
Welcome back. I'm Derek J. Simpson. We've been discussing equality and equity in our community with Dr. Alex Norman, Mark Coleman, and DeJuan Smith. And Mark, you took us into the break, and we were discussing during the break just some key points that we might want to, in the time that we have left, bring out for discussion among us and hopefully for the people who are watching to discuss amongst themselves in the community on an ongoing basis. And you touched on two things. One was the police issues of today and the topic of even the new Jim Crow, which is something of interest as well. Can you share what you were talking about there?
Well, I want to say, first of all, a thank you to DeJuan. It's great to see you again. He's one of our students from the Advanced Organizing Institute. Mm-hmm. It's one of our stars. So, but one thing he's talking about is how the police are viewed, their roles in the communities, and the use of massive incarcerations to control black youth in particular, black males in particular. And I thought The New Jim Crow, that book, is a fascinating, well-documented, well-researched explanation of how racism moved from the overt stages that we saw in the South prior to the Civil War to the new Jim Crow, which is to use mass incarcerations of blacks at percentages way above everyone else as a way of controlling the black population. And police, as seen as part of that new Jim Crow system, that role, that institutional concept, and that has to be addressed if we're going to talk about seriously addressing community police relations in that community. That's the first point. The second one has to do with, we talk about in the past, the police were used to protect the public, the rich elite public, from by using laws that were unjust, and Dr. Norman alluded to some of them. And my point is that it's going on today. So the Supreme Court recently stripped most of the Voting Rights Act. So what did we see? What do we see today? And what's going to happen in November? Well, those of us that work in voter protection are seeing an increase in states with Republican legislatures in control of voting, or even Republican counties, shortening poll hours, limiting the number of polls in the community, making people go many, many more miles to vote, eliminating early voting, requiring photo IDs, all of these things designed to keep what? To keep primarily black citizens from voting, but also Latinos. So those laws, that's happening today. And it's designed to have a direct and immediate impact on the community by trying to force the election a certain way.
Wow. Would you say, that's so powerful what you're saying, and would you say that the average person on the streets, Dr. Norman, even realizes that when you talk about the impact that could have?
The average policeman doesn't realize it. And that's one reason that I believe is so important for police and community residents, youth, adults, males, LGBT, think of an ethnic or a gender group, should have interaction. Because the more you interact, the more you learn about each other. The possibility is police might really realize that they're being used. So it behooves those in power to disallow police and community from getting together, or to keep them in the hook and book 'em relationship, so that if I see you always as a threat, then I will perceive that my responsibility is to lessen that threat. And on the other hand, I see you as an occupier, then my response is going to be to avoid that occupier at all costs, including calling in for safety, because sometimes that occupier comes and for a minor incident and somebody ends up dead. So you have this relationship that's peculiar in the sense that the police are here to suppress and in some cases oppress within the rule of law. But the law itself is what constricts that relationship. And how we get beyond that is to get to the institutional bias beyond that. And that institutional bias is created by those who are profiting financially from this system.
You also mentioned, as we were discussing during the break, your reflections on Kelly's presentation in terms of how we might approach what the city of Long Beach is possibly going to do as it relates to equity, and that maybe the script should be flipped somewhat in terms of how they launch this process. Can you share that as well?
Yeah, well, there are two issues that relate to that. One is this Office on Equity that she mentioned about Councilman Rex Richardson is promoting. The other, though, is the $600,000 grant that the police just got, and has developed a partnership with CCEJ, the Conference for Justice and Equality, to do bias training. bias training within the construct that we talked about is simply going to put police in a more untenable position where they're going to be able to recognize that their biases are really causing them to perpetrate violence on sometimes innocent victims, sometimes on the correct victims, but many times on innocent victims, as with the current situation where the sheriff's department killed the wrong guy. Well, fortunate for the sheriff's department, Sheriff O'Connell said, hey, you know, that was McDonald said, you know, that was a mistake. Very seldom do police departments say that was a mistake. So even the bad cops who do bad things don't have any punishment. That situation has to change. And in order for that situation to change, it can't be through anti-bias training. It has to be through interacting with people so you recognize them as the human beings that they are, and they recognize you as the human beings that you are. So when somebody tells you to enforce an unjust law, you question the person who is telling you to enforce the unjust law, not carry it out and say, I was doing it in the cause of my duty.
And from the standpoint of the equity approach, you were talking about getting feedback from the community first as opposed to...
Exactly, because from what Kelly was saying, she's looking for an equity coordinator. I would flip that to a community coordinator, because what you want to know is, what do the youth of today think equity means to them? You know, the youth of the day are much less biased toward LGBT individuals than their parents are. And so their parents are going to think one thing, they're going to think another thing. We need direct input. That needs to be a direct feedback mechanism to any office, whether it's equity or the police, so that rather than developing these policies and then going to the community, I think we need to go to the communities, the different ethnic communities, the gender community, the low-income communities, and find out what does equity mean to you in all of those categories: housing, education, public safety. What does equity mean in those? And what is it that you would set as your first priority for an office of equity to involve itself in? And we need to pile that into some kind of distillation and then create a mission for that office.
Dewan, when you hear this, what would you say the priority should be from a millennial perspective?
I mean, like he said, you have to focus on the youth, I believe, because those are the most impacted. If you look at these stats, it's the youth that's most impacted by, you know, police stop, police violence, you know, dropout rates, you know, school to prison pipeline. So I would ask, you know, and it's already starting. It's a big push for a youth development department in LA County to specifically work on preventional work and youth centers for youth. So I feel like that's a step forward if we push together and actually, you know, get that passed or get that moving forward. Then we can actually start seeing a change within our communities with ourselves. To speak on what you spoke about, the unjust laws, I feel like, yeah, we can talk to the police and they can understand us and we can understand them, but it's still an unjust law. I believe we should have legislation change. So when it comes down to police, they're only doing their job, right? I hear that a lot, and they're upholding the law, right? Which is sometimes unjust. But if we change those unjust laws into laws that the community can put in place, then they're upholding law that benefits us.
Okay. Policy change. And Mark, I know you're working in the court system and you see many things, and I don't want it to only be on the issue of criminal justice equity. That's why I opened the show saying socioeconomics. And I know you and Dr. Norman, again, working from the Cambodian community perspective, see the whole spectrum of the issue of equity. Your thoughts from not only just education, but jobs and basically really becoming a full participant in our community. What would you like to see as some of the barriers that come down immediately in that regard?
Well, I think that one thing I'm just synthesizing as I'm listening to all of this and listening to Kelly's presentation is sometimes it's best to approach issues like equity, equality, integration from a not knowing perspective, that we really want to go out in the communities and really, with open ears and arms, listen to what they have to say about these issues. And because understanding can't happen without listening first. And as long as government just sort of plods ahead and says, oh, well, equity means a coordination of services that are already dealing with this issue, we're not really going to get to the things that the three of us are talking about, which are not just access, but integration, meaningful entry. And in my practice, when I'm doing discrimination work for over 30 years, we always want to look at results. We always want to know, well, we started out with affirmative action and goals and timetables. How did we actually do? Did what you do make a difference? Are things different now than they were when you started? Did you integrate the police force? Did you integrate the fire departments? And a lot of times it's yes, but if they're all equally accessing the oppression of their communities to enforce unjust laws, what do we got? I mean, going back to Eula Love in 1979, she was shot by a white policeman and a black policeman. You know, here we are today. Marcella Bird, the list goes on. You know, we just continue to experience the same problems because we're not really listening. And I guess my last point would be, I love the Ta-Nehisi Coates book, Between the World and Me, because in that book, there's really an in-depth exploration, without giving names to it, of what are the forces that bring people to the point at which they are really incapable of dealing with a situation other than by lashing out, by fearing, by reacting as the police do to a young black man or that young black men do to a white police officer in their communities. So as I think we're all saying, let's step back. Let's use the Office of Equity as an opportunity to go out in the communities. And I know Councilwoman Pierce is interested in pursuing this, as are others. Now is the time. Let's have a real dialogue.
And I think it was maybe you, Dr. Norman, said deep change requires all major partners at the table with a common vision. And I hear that as a thread in this conversation as well. And right now it sounds like there is a table, but maybe necessarily not all the right partners are at that table. And that's got to change if we're going to have any meaningful change, because then it's like one of my mentors said, you're either at the table or on the menu. Yes. And I feel like a lot of people right now feel like they're a part of that menu, and it's not a good feeling. And that's some of the repercussions that we're seeing in our community. What city is doing it right? Is there any place that we could say, wow, if we looked at this place or that place? I know when Councilman Richardson had his event, he invited a councilwoman from Oakland, and he invited someone from Seattle. I've heard Portland is really a great example. One thing I liked about what I heard in Oakland, and I don't know how effective it is at this moment, was that when it came to young men of color, their school district actually created a position, and that's what that position's full responsibility was to address the issues and concerns of young men of color in that school district. That's basically putting your money where your mouth is there. So let's go back to the point of who's doing it right. We have about 4 minutes. What city would you say that we should emulate best practices of?
Well, I would start with Portland, because Portland did a regional atlas looking at geographic opportunity within the metropolitan area of Portland. That was in 2007. And my niece was working in Kaiser's emergency, and she knew I was doing equity work, so she sent me a copy of that regional atlas. From that regional atlas, my Rethinking Greater Long Beach colleague and I looked at that, and we modeled the Long Beach Atlas after the Portland Regional Atlas. Now, what Portland did, they took that database and created an Office of Equity and human rights, equity and human rights. So they looked at the issue of social justice. Mm-hmm. I think that we should do the same thing. We should look at the data. Mm-hmm. And as we look at the data, take the data, look at what it says. It says, one, that poverty and low educational attainment are the critical variables that drives inequality. So the schools have to do something. So the schools have to accept a major responsibility, as in Oakland, you know, and the city has to accept a major responsibility. That is, they have to put together offices that deal specifically with the issue of equity, not just from a current, but from an historical perspective. Okay. And when we do something like that, then I think we might, you know, in other words, we shouldn't just adopt Oakland's model. We should take Oakland's model and better it for the diversity of Long Beach.
Closing thoughts. I got 2 minutes, real quick. Mark, what would you like to say?
Well, in line with all of this is the concept of an Office of Immigrant Integration, just along with an equity or human rights officer, someone whose job it is to ensure that our large immigrant population is truly integrating into the opportunities that we profess to have for all people.
Dewan, any closing thoughts?
Just let's start having a conversation with the people who are most impacted by these injustices, the people on probation, reentry, people coming home from lockup, people who are in continuation schools, all these people that are the most impacted. I think they have the most, they qualify for the experience to actually change these things that we go through, these injustices that we go through.
Thank you, gentlemen. I mean, this is a conversation we could have for another hour, but I think this has been a good start, and I hope people pay attention to the issues. I'd like to thank Dr. Alex Norman, Mark Coleman, Kelly Calopi from the Health Department, and Dewan Smith for joining us in this studio for this very important discussion about socioeconomic equity and police relations. Be sure to follow PadNet TV on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram for the latest updates. We also welcome your comments and thoughts regarding this show as we strive to make Long Beach Lens a favorite source of local news, information, and entertainment. This show has been brought to you with support from the Long Beach Community Action Partnership. Thank you for watching Long Beach Lens.